I'm still alive and I've caved. Today I'm going to be reading the entirety of The Frozen World, the book I wrote when I was 12. Also, I definitely do not have space on my phone to record this, so you're stuck with webcam, Scott. I am not going to edit this as I normally would, so this is going to be the worst video on the channel. And without further ado, this is The Frozen World, written by Scott Murphy. Just gonna move my webcam up a little bit. There we go. For all the dreamers like me who just want to be different. Cold. All I know now is the cold. There's ice in my boots and snow in my coat. The land is a barren wasteland of ice. Tall pillars of snow that might have once been buildings surround us. There might be people still in those buildings like us. People who are trying to survive with too little water, too little food, and most importantly, too little heat. We walk through the streets, dodging through the frozen cars and trying not to look at the people inside, frozen from the cold, forever trapped in their dying moments. The six of us are all weary with exhaustion, but we must keep going. We go on through a park, seeing the frozen trees and frozen people. I trip on the icy grass and fall onto the ground. I get up, numb to the pain. We travel in complete darkness, guided only by our flashlights. A few weeks ago, I may have been able to name that planet, but that seems like a lifetime ago. The planet's name doesn't matter. Nothing matters. We've been walking for hours now, and although we must have walked miles, it feels like we haven't moved at all. There are no landmarks, nothing to break up the monotony. It's sad, really. This one city must have had a population of millions, but now there are perhaps 500 people who are still alive. I didn't notice the hole until I fell in. It wasn't very deep, maybe 8 feet, but in my condition, it felt like 800. There was a ladder, but I didn't reach for it. I just curled up to die. I heard another member of our group yelling something. Perhaps it was my name, but I didn't get up. This was all that was left of Earth, a frozen world. That's the name of the book. Chapter 1. Houston, NASA Headquarters, 2025, July 14th, Monday. A terrible thing happened on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon. It happened in the middle of July, on July 17th. It happened at exactly 4 minutes and 37, wait, 4:37 and 19 seconds. Okay. But no one in the world knew about what had happened until 4:45 and 49 seconds. Except for 3 people. "This is the most boring job in the world," proclaimed James Benton, NASA intern, for the third time in the last 7 minutes. The other 2 men looked up at this, annoyed. James had loudly proclaimed this, at least in their eyes, 2,000 times in the past 2 months since they had had this job. James was a 21-year-old who had achieved straight C's in high school and a 900 on the SAT, resulting in him not going to college, which was why he became an intern at NASA, where his father worked. Although thankfully his father was off for the summer, so James could relax. He was handsome, slightly lanky young man who pretty much everyone liked. He had dirty blonde hair and almost always wore a red polo shirt and sweatpants. He was sitting in a large swivel chair, which he called his boss chair, with his feet kicked up dangerously close to one of the computers. The room that the 3 men worked in was about 100 square feet. 3 of the 4 walls were taken up by old computers. In front of the computers there were a bunch of chairs. There was a desk in the middle of the room with 2 chairs right by it. The walls were painted a boring tan color. Neither of the 2 men wanted to respond to this for different reasons. One didn't want to get into a conflict. The other just didn't want to get off his phone. The 2 men had a silent argument that James affected to ignore. Finally one of them sighed and reluctantly put down their phone. "We know you've told us," said James's best friend, Bruce. Bruce was 21 years old, like James, and had a similar sense of humor, but that was where the similarities ended. Bruce had dark brown hair and was much stockier than James. He was sort of handsome, the sort of being a result of his slightly broken nose. He was on the football team in high school and got mostly B's and a few A's. He scored 1150 on the SAT, so he could have gone to college, but instead he chose to stay with James, and when James' dad got him the job at NASA, James asked if Bruce could have one too. Bruce usually wore dark t-shirts and camo shorts on most days. The third man's face went through a series of emotions very quickly. At first he was triumphant at his win over the argument with Bruce. Then he looked a little grateful that somebody other than him was finally telling James how annoying he was. Then he was exasperated as he realized that Bruce was agreeing with James. The third intern, whose name was Terrence, said, "We have a very important job." Now it was James's turn to look a little annoyed at Terrence's feeble attempts to assert his authority. Terrence was 17 years old and had already almost gotten his PhD at MIT. He was only a year away. He was very smug as a result of his perfect SAT score. He was interning at NASA over the summer because working at NASA was his dream job. He was short, handsome in a nerdy sort of way, and was very thin. He always wore, without fail, a white MIT shirt, a lab coat, and black formal pants. Terrence detested James and Bruce's popularity, and wasn't exactly their biggest fan either. He always tried to assert his authority over them and always failed. Yeah, totally important, exclaimed James sarcastically, rolling his eyes. It was not the first time this little byplay had happened between them. Nerd, James said in an undertone to Bruce. Bruce hastily hid a smile. Bitter experience had taught him that Terence could be extremely unpleasant when he chose to be. Terence's head shot up. "What was that?" he said angrily. Terence had a quick temper, especially when he thought he was being belittled. He also had superb hearing, a fact that James and Bruce found more than a little annoying. Me too. "This should be fun," Bruce muttered. Fortunately, neither Terence nor James had heard him. But even if they had, it wouldn't have been that big of a deal. James and Bruce were best friends, but Bruce didn't share James's love of aggravating Terence. James spread his arms out in a gesture of innocence and annoyance. He said angrily, "I called you a nerd. Sue me." He went back to relaxing, hoping the conversation would end there. But Terence would not back down that easily. "I am not a nerd, James," Terence said, trying to heal his injured pride. James ignored him, as did Bruce. Terence found this infuriating. "I said, Mr. Benton, that I am not a nerd." James finally looked up. He tapped his ears. "Sorry, I can't hear you. I've got my headphones in." James bobbed his head to non-existent music. Terence's patience, already stretched to the breaking point, finally snapped. He was about to unleash a torrent of scornful comments when Bruce decided it was time to intervene. "Let it go, Terence," he said warningly. Terence did something very surprising. He snapped his mouth shut and sat back down in his chair. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Terence, after being quiet for a good few minutes, decided it was time he broke the silence. "So," he said cautiously. James threw up his hands in an expression of utter annoyance. "Will you ever be quiet more than minutes?" James asked. Terence drew breath to reply, then decided that it would be more smart to just ignore James. "Anyway, our job is very important," Terence said as he tried to drive his original point home. Neither Bruce nor James responded to this. Terence's temper began to flare up again. "Observation of the sun is important," said Terence heatedly. He looked at Bruce, desperate for an ally and not wanting to repeat their earlier discussion. "Right, Bruce?" Bruce, who was studying scientific data on his phone, looked up. "I'm with James on this one. It's not like the sun's gonna change." Bruce's phone then made a noise that sounded distinctly like Candy Crush. James then got up, stretched, and started walking toward the door. "Where are you going?" Terence asked, although he had a pretty good feeling that he knew the answer to the question. "Donut break," James replied. Terence sighed. Terence knew that the occasional break can do wonders for focus and concentration. However, he also knew that over 15 breaks, James's daily break count, in one day would almost certainly not help one's focus and concentration. "What are you, a cop?" Bruce asked as he followed James to the door. James rolled his eyes. "You've made that joke one too many times," James said, pointing his finger threateningly at Bruce. Bruce put up his hands in mock fear. "Oh no, whatever shall I do?" Bruce said in a voice that was slightly higher than his usual voice. "If you are mad at me, Master James, then my life is ruined." He went on to his knees and pretended to grovel at James's feet. James was roaring in laughter at this. When he stopped laughing, he asked, "Is that an impression of Terence?" Bruce was quite pleased that James had gotten the joke. The fact that Terence was the smartest of the three and would probably advance the most in the world did not stop Bruce and James from constantly making jokes at his own expense. Bruce grinned. Yeah. Terence, who was much too focused on the computers, did not hear their newest Terence joke. "Let's go get our donuts," James said from the hall. Bruce turned to walk out the door, but then stopped and turned back around. Bruce opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Do you want to come with us to get donuts?" Bruce asked reluctantly. Terence looked up a little surprised. They never invited him to donut breaks before. "But what if something important happens?" Terence asked. "Okay, what if something important happens?" Bruce challenged. Terence looked around and the room uncertainly. "Well, if something important happens, or something, important, then no one will be here to see it," Terence finished unimpressively. "Yeah, like the sun's gonna disappear," Bruce said with a voice dripping with sarcasm. Bruce left the office and went down the hall to the break room. "All right, fine, I'll come," Terence agreed, not wanting to be left out. He got from his chair, stretched, then followed Bruce. All right, that's the end of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Houston, NASA Headquarters, 2025, July 14th, Monday. "Clear the way!" a NASA employee yelled. "Clear the way! Expensive equipment coming through." "What now?" James asked. When no one answered, he said, "This can only mean one thing, more work for us." Terence was curious. "I wonder what the new equipment is." James looked at him, puzzled. "Why?" Then without waiting for an answer, he said, "Just stay out of their way, and above all, don't offer to help." Terence was indignant. "What if they come in here, oh great king of avoiding work?" Terence asked in a mock reverent voice. James looked at Terence like the answer was obvious. "We're interns, Terence. Why would they come in here?" James looked away and then asked, "Oh, sorry." "It's probably just more funding for Jeffrey's Comet project," Bruce grumbled. As a result of their previous conversation a few months later, the three men were very surprised when the two NASA employees, uh, I need to reread that sentence. As a result of their three As a result of their previous conversation a few months later, the three men were very surprised when the two NASA employees rolled the expensive equipment into their room. This is what happens when I don't edit. Scram, said the first employee. We're installing new computers, and I want you out. And we want you out. Terrence perked up when he heard new computers. We are getting new computers? Terrence asked, unbelieving. The first employee jerked a thumb at the new computers. Everyone else has them, he said. He then nodded towards their old computers. And your old computers look like they're from the Stone Age. When he saw everyone looking at him curiously, he yelled, Scram! We have to get these installed before tomorrow, and I don't want a bunch of sightseers around. James, Bruce, and Terence looked suitably taken aback by the sightseers comment, but they gathered their things and left for their apartment building. The trio walked to the bus stop and sat down. And James turned to Bruce and casually said, Season 9 of Game of Thrones starts tonight. What? Bruce looked surprised and thought, I thought that show stopped in 2019. James hastened to reassure him. Everyone thought so, but it was a ruse. The producers wanted to give the actors a break, and the writers needed more time to think of new and exciting storylines. Bruce looked a little upset. Sorry, I have a trip I need to go on. James was confused. A trip? You never told me. Terrence joined the conversation. Where are you going? Bruce grinned, unable to contain himself. Westeros, he said, laughing. After a moment's hesitation, James did too. Only Terence looked confused. Westeros isn't a real place. James said very slowly, It is a fictional place, Terence. It's where Game of is set. Terence sniffed in disdain and turned. Okay, for some reason I never seen Game of Thrones. For some reason I decided to add a ton of references into it because this was ending and I was trying to be topical. Alright, enough editorializing. James looked back at Bruce. Okay, it's on at 7. At that moment the bus arrived and began driving to James, Bruce, and Terrence's building. Terrence fidgeted around a lot. Bruce glanced at him. I told you to go to the bathroom when we left NASA, he said in the tone of an upset parent. Terrence said, I don't have to go to the bathroom. I just really want to say something. Then say it! James and Bruce yelled together. The other occupants in the bus turned to look at them. James and Bruce shrunk down a little in their seats. The three sat in silence under the withering gaze of some of the other bus occupants. When the bus finally arrived at their building, they got off quickly. Their building was an 8-story brick building. It had a flat roof and was very plain. It was neither in a good neighborhood nor a bad one. While the three lived in the same building, they weren't all roommates. James and Bruce lived together on the 6th floor, and Terence lived above them on the 7th floor. Terence took great pleasure in doing everything he did in his apartment very loudly to annoy James and Bruce on the floor below. When they got in the elevator, Terence finally said what was on his mind. Did you see those new high-tech computers, he said. I can't wait to read solar readouts on them tomorrow. James and Bruce stopped the elevator. Oh, look, this is our stop, James said. Terence looked at what floor they were on. Really? This is only the 2nd floor. Are you sure you don't want to ride the elevator? As the doors were closing, Terence heard Bruce say, Not with you rambling on it. Chapter 3. Houston, NASA Headquarters, 2025, July 15th, Tuesday. At precisely 7 a.m. on Tuesday, July 15th, two NASA janitors heard an odd sound. If someone had asked them to describe the sound, they would have said it was a high-pitched, fast keening sound. It appeared to be coming from the bus stop a couple of hundred feet from the NASA headquarters main entrance. It grew steadily louder. Eventually the janitors were able to identify words. They sounded like, new computers, new computers, new computers, new computers, new computers, new computers! They could then see what was making the noise. A small young man running full tilt for the door. The janitors were then made aware of another noise coming from two other young men at the bus stop, but who were banging their heads against the poles that were there. That noise sounded like, why are there new computers? Bang! Why are there new computers? Bang! Why are there new computers? Bang! The janitors then turned their attention back to the running man. He was almost at the door. He's gonna hit the door, one of the janitors said. Terence then ran smack into the reinforced glass door. The janitors heard the sound of very enthusiastic cheering from the bus stop. The janitors were very confused when they saw the two men at the bus stop forming a conga line singing, Terence ran into the door, 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 hip hip hooray! The janitors, now thoroughly confused, put their stuff in the supply closet and left. Ow, Terence said, rubbing his head. Terence slowly got to his feet and looked around groggily. He started with surprise when he saw James and Bruce forming a conga line. I must be hallucinating, he said, remembering that hallucinations often meant a concussion. He shook his head as if hoping that the simple action would rid him of the hallucinations. He closed his eyes and then opened them again. He saw Bruce and James. Terrence ran into the door. Terrence ran into the door. Yep, definitely hallucinating, Terrence muttered to himself. He decided to avoid the main entrance and walk towards the back entrance. James and Bruce followed him. Terrence ran into the door. Terrence ran into the door. Terrence turned back to give them a withering stare. Unfortunately for him, the effect was ruined when he walked into one of the rakes that littered the ground near the back entrance. At NASA? He grumbled something unintelligible as the rake whipped up and hit his face. Was that Sideshow Bob? James asked, laughing. Terrence just stared at him angrily. Bruce decided that Terrence had suffered enough, at least for now. Oh, cheer up, Terrence, Bruce said. The new computer still got installed today. Instantly, Terrence cheered up. You're right, let's go. But to the sheer joy of James, Terrence ran directly into the very lake that he had just put back down. Well, I tried, Bruce said, barely hiding a smile. Then he couldn't resist adding, Sideshow Bob. Terrence didn't say a word. He just followed James and Bruce into NASA headquarters. As he followed them, he appeared to be thinking very intensely. As they approached the hall the room was situated on, Terrence said in a triumphant tone to James, well, you're as fat as Homer. He smiled proudly. James looked confused. Excuse me? You said I was Sideshow Bob, so I told you that you were as fat as Homer, Terrence explained. It took you that long to figure out a comeback? James asked, grinning. No, no, of course not, Terrence said. I was just, waiting for the right time. And at the back entrance wasn't the right time. No? Terrence said uncertainly. James just shook his head. As they came close to the office, Terrence started doing a little dance. New computers, oh yeah. New computers, oh yeah. New computers, oh yeah. Terrence sang, back in his previous good spirits. While Bruce fished out the key to their office from his pocket, Terrence was actually hopping from one foot to another in anticipation. After what seemed like an hour to Terrence, although it was actually less than 30 seconds, Bruce finally found the key. Did you take forever on purpose? Terrence asked, as Bruce put the key into the lock. Bruce looked Terrence directly in the eye and said in a very serious tone, Yes. Yes, I did. Oh, Phineas and Ferb reference. Ordinarily, a scornful comment would be the only reply to such a question. However, today in his excitement, Terrence just nodded. Terrence charged through the unlocked door to see the new computers. Terrence gasped. They're beautiful, he said in a tone approaching reverence. James snorted. They're just computers. Both of their comments were correct, although perhaps Terrence's was a little extreme. The 5 new computers had taken the place of the 5 old ones. The old computers had been at least 20 years old. The new computers were the latest model. They had a 32-inch screen and a keyboard that was trimmed with electric blue lights. The mouse was navy blue and had the NASA symbol on the left click. The 5 monitors displayed readouts of the sun. They were much better quality than the readouts on the old computers. Despite his earlier comment, James began admiring the computers. Bruce was quick to follow him. James walked down the line of computers. He stopped at the 4th one when he saw his boss chair. He quickly got back into his usual position. James nodded to the computer in front of him. Hey, Terrence, you're tech savvy, right? He asked. Terrence, who was glancing through the computer readouts, looked up. Why do you ask? Terrence asked suspiciously. Then, without waiting for an answer, he said, But yes, I am good with technology, or as you put it, tech savvy. Terrence delivered the last 2 words in a gruff impression of James' voice. Oh, I'll do that again in a gruff impression of James' voice. But yes, I am good with technology, or as you put it, tech savvy. James ignored the last few words and only focused on Terrence's answer. So would it be possible to download games onto these computers? He asked slowly. Terrence exploded. Do you think I would tarnish my reputation just to help you put games on a computer? James smiled. I never asked you to put games on the computer. I just asked if it was possible. Terrence's mouth clamped shut. James kept smiling. And you just told me that it is possible. Terrence realized he'd been tricked. He started to say something, then stopped. He sat down in a chair, no doubt thinking of a crushing reply. James kicked back in his chair, satisfied that he had tricked Terrence. He and James began humming the Game of Thrones theme song. Terrence started looking at the readings on one of the computers. The quiet lasted almost 10 minutes. Then James got bored. He turned to Bruce and asked loudly, So, Bruce, what games do you think we should get on the computers now that we know it's possible to actually get the games? James glanced over at Terrence. His face was a little flushed, and he was obviously trying to keep his too quick temper in check. James noticed how hard he had been trying to keep his temper in check. Well, let's see about that, James thought. He decided he'd poke the bear a little more, or maybe a lot more. James turned back to Bruce, and who had not blah. James turned back to Bruce, who had not responded to his last question, probably because he had seen it for what it truly was. Well, I think we should get Minecraft 1.28.2 for starters, James began. I had no idea how quick Minecraft updates came out, but he was cut off by Terrence. You guys aren't getting games for the new computers, Terrence said, aggravated. You're not our boss, Terrence, James said. He put as much contempt as he possibly could into the last word. Well, Shut up, both of you, Bruce yelled. You're always sniping at each other, and I'm sick of it. Gosh, it's so bad. Bruce looked James in the eyes, then Terrence said, "Stop arguing. Better yet, stop talking." Incredibly, the two adversaries sat back down and shut up. They were like this for over an hour. Then James couldn't take it anymore. "I'm getting a donut," he said, daring anyone to challenge him. But Bruce was just glad they weren't fighting, and Terrence was staring at the computer screen with a puzzled expression. James left, satisfied no one was going to stop him. Terrence closed his eyes and then shook his head. He opened his eyes again and was still puzzled. After about 2 minutes, he decided to get a second opinion. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to a light on the computer screen. Bruce looked up from his phone. "What now?" Terrence asked again. "That reading, what does it mean?" James came back holding a donut. "I don't know, you're the one who paid attention when they told us, well, everything," he said. He was careful to keep an argumentative tone out of his voice. Terrence ignored him. Shouldn't we tell someone?" "No," James and Bruce said at the exact same time. "You guys are useless. I'm calling Dr. Clancy." "If you call Dr. Clancy, then he'll just tell us not to worry, and he'll stay here for a few days, and then we won't be able to have any donut breaks." "What?" He then took a massive bite out of his donut. "Okay, fine, we'll deal with it ourselves," Terrence said. The three interns sat in silence. Bruce continued playing on his phone, and James watched him while eating a donut. After a half hour, Terrence yelled triumphantly, "Yes!" Bruce fell over, and James dropped his donut at the unexpected sound. "What was that for?" James asked angrily, picking up his donut. He didn't care about the no arguing warning anymore. "I found out what the reading meant," Terrence replied. Bruce and James looked at each other. They seemed to have a silent agreement, a long silent agreement. "Fine, I'll ask him," Terrence muttered angrily to James. James smirked. "What was that?" Terrence asked. James let out a short bark of laughter. He was usually the one on the receiving end of Terrence's annoyance. It felt good for him to see Bruce feeling the pain. Bruce looked to James and back to Terrence. Nothing." James made a go-ahead gesture to Bruce as he barely suppressed a laugh. "So what did it mean?" Bruce asked. "Are you sure you want to know?" Terrence asked smugly. "No, but you'll tell us anyway, so just say it." Bruce said, "Okay, so basically there's a second son," Terrence said, now confident in his perception of what the reading meant. Alright, we're at the end of chapter 3. This is so much worse than I remember. Like, again, we're on page 15. There's 84 total pages. The, not the logic makes any sense. The characters are all so mean and just not likable or just downright annoying. Like, oh my gosh, this is just so bad, and there's no logic. There is not any. It's like I don't. It's like an insult to books to call this a story. Like this is so outrageously bad. Like I don't know why you want. Oh, okay. I'm continuing. All right. Chapter 4, Houston, NASA Headquarters, 2025, July 15th, Tuesday. Great, glad we're starting it with that every single time. James dropped his donut again. Bruce just stood where he was, looking a little annoyed. "A second son?" James said, his previous bravado replaced with shock. "How is no one—" "Well, it's quite simple, actually," Terrence started. "Get to the point," James and Bruce said simultaneously. "Okay, Terrence said. "I'll get to the point. Nobody cares about the sun. As you said yesterday, Bruce, it's not like the sun's gonna disappear. That's why we got this job so easily, because no one else wanted it. However, NASA still doesn't want someone watching the sun for obvious reasons, so we had the oldest computers for a reason. But today, as you know, we got new computers." "Great. Why couldn't we see this on our computers?" James asked. "Did you look at the solar readouts on your computer?" Terrence counted. He knew James had. "Fair point," James said. Terrence continued. "As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted," James and Terrence exchanged dark looks at this. "They installed the new computers. Then I saw something, a small, for lack of a better term, a blip. This blip was extremely close to the sun, so I originally thought it was an alpha ray, which would have been bad because in a society this reliant on technology would have been crippled. Then I remembered that the next alpha ray explosion is due to happen in 2040, so I zoomed in on the reading, and I realized that it was just a tiny star about the size of a house. So I wondered, why is it showing this up on my screen? So I checked its mass. And you know what this mass was?" "Why on earth would we know or care?" James asked, annoyed. Terrence ignored him. "It was 1.989 times 10 to the power of 30 kilograms," Terrence said. "Why is that important?" "Because that is the mass of the sun," Terrence told them. "So wait, is this mini star same mass?" "What?" James mumbled. James said, "So wait, shouldn't we tell anyone about this? Shouldn't we tell someone about this issue?" "Well, I'm eager to tell Dr. Clancy about my discovery." Throughout all of this, Bruce had been quiet, and had been looking back and forth between James and Terrence. Finally, he couldn't take it any longer. "Are you guys insane?" James and Terrence looked at him, surprised by this outburst. "What?" Terrence asked. "Insane?" "Yes, insane. Look, Terrence, no offense, But are you telling me that every scientist in NASA has been wrong and has not seen the second son of extremely large mass, but you, the teenage intern who hasn't even finished college yet, is right? Yes, good point. I'm hardly a teenager. I'll be 18 in Terran Star. Your age is not in the question here. As I already explained, no one cares about the sun, so no one knows. Oh, come on, some people do care about the sun. None of them at NASA. Okay, fine. What about SpaceX, Blue Origin, or Raven Industries? Okay, I have to pause this now because here we get to a very annoying point. I'm gonna go back to full webcam for this. Okay, so I need to find and replace any time it says a very specific name. Because at this time, we were friends with someone who wanted to found a company that was like a SpaceX competitor called Raven Industries. And basically, I thought it was going to be super successful. So I included it in my book as well as the full name of our friend. And I made him like this super cool character. For his privacy, I'm gonna need to edit some of that out, and I'm gonna where it said the name, and I'm gonna need to find and replace all of that now. It's such a bad book. Okay, I've just found and replaced all the instances where it said his real full name, and I replaced it with something else. The character is going to be Brock Clinton, and he founded Raven Industries. Brock Clinton is not my friend's real name. All right, back to reading this. Okay, fine. What about SpaceX, Blue Origin, or Raven Industries? Well, so you're telling me that Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Brock Clinton, some of the richest people in the world and the owners of three incredibly big space companies, have never thought of taking a look at the sun? We just got new computers installed for viewing the sun, so NASA's terrible funding, you should know that, and yet even NASA has these new computers. So you don't think that Raven Industries, the biggest and best funded space program, has it? Terrence was struggling to find an answer to this. Well, maybe they never thought to. Bruce put his hand on Terrence's shoulder. He has to lean down considerably to do this, for he was the tallest of the three, and Terrence was the shortest. You're grasping at straws here, Terrence. Terrence pushed Bruce's hand off his shoulder. I am not. James came into the conversation at this point. I'm with Bruce. Yes, you are. Terrence rounded on James. A few minutes ago, you were all, what? Same math? What? That was before I realized how ridiculous your theory was. Terrence looked at his coworkers angrily. Then what was the reading on the computer then? Probably just a system glitch. These aren't new computers, Terrence said in the way someone would speak to a 5-year-old. Yes, exactly. It's a prototype. James said in the same way. No, it is not, Terrence said indignantly. You're the smart one, and you can say for sure what it is. But in any case, it's new. It's bound to be glitchy, James said. A bell rang, signaling it was time to leave. Yes, because that's how companies work. Finally, it's 5 o'clock. We can go home, Bruce said. As Bruce and James walked out, Terrence slumped defeated. Then he got up and followed Bruce and James back to their apartment building. Chapter 5 Houston, NASA Headquarters, 2025, July 16th, Wednesday. Oh, it just doesn't get old. Why can't we just start work at 10 o'clock every day instead of sunrise? Bruce Johnson asked the room at large. James and Bruce both looked at Terrence in expectancy, waiting for him to give an annoying answer in a condescending tone. But he didn't. Terrence just put down his bag and walked over to the computer that he'd been using the day before. Yep, it's still there, Terrence muttered to himself as he looked at the computer screen. Huh? James asked, only half interested. Nothing, nothing, Terrence said distractedly. Okay, James said, stifling a yawn. But Terrence wasn't listening. He was already utterly enveloped in the computer screen. Do you think it's too early for a donut break? James had thought aloud. He was always hungry for donuts. Bruce looked up. You just had breakfast 20 minutes ago. That doesn't mean I'm not hungry, James replied, patting his stomach. It doesn't matter. Dr. Clancy makes weekly inspections on Wednesdays, remember? James nodded in agreement, but Terrence looked up. What? He asked. Bruce looked surprised. Terrence always knew this kind of stuff. Dr. Clancy's inspection is today, Bruce said, still puzzled. Terrence nodded distractedly. Good. I thought you would have known that, Terrence, James said. You didn't, Terrence countered. James continued unabashed. Yeah, but you're the smart one, and I had my mind on donuts. Terrence nodded and turned to look back to the computer, but Bruce stopped him. You said good earlier, Bruce said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. He knew what Terrence was up to. I did? Is that a crime? Terrence said. He was obviously hiding something. Bruce ignored him and continued. Why exactly are you that happy about an inspection from Dr. Clancy? Am I not allowed to be happy about gaining more knowledge? Come on, you know me, Bruce. I like learning, Terrence stated. He had deflected the question. You're right. I do know you, and ordinarily wouldn't be happy about learning something that you've already known. Terrence started. I also know that you're dodging my original question. Why are you so happy about Dr. Clancy's inspection today? Bruce asked. James realized what Bruce was getting at by this point. Since Bruce was the bigger one of him and James, people tended to think Bruce was dumb. He wasn't. Bruce was actually quite quick on the uptake. "You're not planning to tell Dr. Clancy about your crazy second son theory, are you?" James asked. "Well, sort of, maybe, no," Terrence stuttered uncertainly. Bruce raised an eyebrow. "Really?" Terrence looked down. No, he looked back up at James and Bruce. "Well, maybe I am going to tell Dr. Clancy about my second son theory, but you guys aren't my bosses." "But Dr. Clancy is," James muttered. Terrence ignored him. "If I want to share my theory with Dr. Clancy, then you can't stop me," Terrence said. Then he crossed his arms and sat back down stubbornly. Bruce looked to James, who spread out his arms in a "what are you gonna do" gesture. But Bruce wouldn't give up that easily. "Your theory is ridiculous." Then Terrence got up to his feet. "No, it is not." Look, Terrence, if you can prove that your theory is real, then I will apologize and give you, I don't know, $200, Bruce said. It was clear that he thought this would never happen. "However, until you can prove your theory, just don't tell anyone about it." Terrence considered this. He mouthed the words $200 a few times. It was clear he thought this was definitely going to happen. "Better yet, don't tell us about your theory." Bruce and Terrence looked at each other and smiled. Then they said in unison, "Shut up, James." Then they started laughing. "Hey," James said, but he was grinning. Within a few seconds, he was laughing with them as well. Then Terrence said, to the surprise of James and Bruce, "Let's get some donuts." James and Bruce looked at him, expressions of shock on their face. They could tell that this was his version of a peace offering. They walked out of their office to get donuts. Terrence, for the first time since he'd known James and Bruce, and in fact his whole life, felt he had friends. What? All right, continuing. We're a quarter of the way through this. Chapter 6, Houston, NASA Headquarters, 2025, July 17th, Thursday. The day began normally. Terrence, Bruce, and James got to work at 8 a.m. They sat down in their office. James got donuts approximately 15 times throughout the day. Then, at about half an hour before the end of the workday, it happened. James Benton, Bruce Johnson, and Terrence Golden were all in their usual spots. James was, of course, munching on a donut. Bruce was on his phone, as usual. Terrence was studying, as always. Studying the piers, as always. "Guys, do you want to see that comet that Jeffrey discovered hit the sun?" Terrence asked a little boredly. Bruce got up. "We've got nothing better to do." James nodded and followed Bruce to Terrence's computer. Bruce and James noticed that the second sun was still there. They stared at the computer for a few minutes. Then, on the screen, the comet appeared. It flew directly into the sun, almost totally melted. Only a tiny portion of it flew into the sun. Suddenly, Terrence was on his feet. "Look at that!" Terrence said. James and Bruce had been about to walk away. "What?" Terrence rewound the video of the comet hitting the sun. He froze the image at the moment the comet hit the sun. "Look," Terrence repeated. James and Bruce leaned forward. The comet hadn't hit the sun. It had hit Terrence's second sun. But that was just a glitch, James thought. Terrence went back to current footage. Then they saw something else. A reading showed that the mass of the second sun had just increased slightly. The two suns' gravitational pulls had begun pulling on each other. And that wasn't happening before? The two suns were destroying each other. Then, in as if someone turned them invisible, the two suns were gone. James, Bruce, and Terrence were shocked. Bruce was the first one to recover. "Did that just happen?" he asked. James recovered next. "So the sun's gone?" James and Bruce ran outside. Terrence followed them. The trio burst outside. The sun was still in the sky, just like always. "Phew, the sun's still there," James said, so it was really a weird glitch. Terrence looked at him. "No, you idiot! Light from the sun takes 8.5 minutes to reach us. So the sun really blew up?" Terrence gave him a withering look. "No," Bruce looked relieved. "The two suns' gravitational poles destroyed themselves." Bruce looked a lot less relieved. "Now come on, we've got to tell someone," Terrence said urgently. "Earth only has 7 minutes of sunlight left, tops." The three ran into NASA headquarters, searching for Dr. Clancy. They wasted 3 precious minutes trying to find him. Dr. Clancy was a tall man. He wore a lab coat and black-rimmed circular sunglasses. Dr. Clancy was about 60. He had earned the title of doctor at MIT in astronomy. Usually Terrence idolized him, but not today. "Oh, hello, Bruce, James, Terrence," Dr. Clancy said, nodding to each of them. "Did you want to see me for something?" Terrence stepped forward, explaining what had happened with the comet, the mass increase, and the destroyed suns. He concluded his explanation with, "And now Earth only has 2 minutes of sunlight left." Dr. Clancy blinked twice, and then said, "Terrence, what you said is highly unlikely." Terrence looked frustrated and even a little bit angry at this point. "However, I will go outside to see if you were correct or not." But by the time the four of them got outside, Earth only had a minute of sunlight left. "Is the sun going backwards?" James asked, pointing to the sky. It was indeed going backward. It sank below the horizon in the east and rose again in the west. "Terrence," Bruce asked. Terrence was smacking his palm into his hand. I'm so stupid. The sun is gone, and what we're seeing is the light from a dead star." Okay, Bruce said, what's causing this? The sun is gone, so there's no gravitational pull, Terrence explained. Thus, all the planets are going to be orbiting the next most massive celestial body. And what is that? James asked. Dr. Clancy stepped forward. Jupiter. The Earth is now orbiting Jupiter. Dr. Clancy gestured to the streets. People were looking up in the sky, watching the sun go across the sky. Then something new came into the sky. It was tan with brown stripes, and it had a big red spot. Everyone knew what it was. Jupiter, Terrence said in a quiet voice. Yes, Dr. Clancy said. Bruce pointed to the sky. On the opposite side of the sky from Jupiter, the sun set. Then it started to collapse. I suggest we go inside, Terrence said. When the sun disappears, it will be as cold as the Arctic if the Arctic had night. The four of them went inside. Everyone was at the windows or outside. Dr. Clancy turned the heat up to the maximum. He found some coats in a closet and gave them to Terrence, James, Bruce, and himself. He left the closet door open so others could find them. I'm sorry, Terrence, Dr. Clancy said. Terrence nodded, accepting the apology. Yeah, then outside there were gasps as the sun totally disappeared. A few of the NASA employees lunged for the door just before the cold hit. Those few and any others who made it to their houses were the only survivors. All the people who were outside at the time froze to death. The NASA employees were glad that Dr. Clancy had turned the heat up. Many of more people froze inside their homes or businesses. Are the people outside going to be okay? Terrence asked hopefully, although he already knew the answer. Dr. Clancy responded grimly. The only people who have a chance are the ones who turn their heat up to the maximum and have lots of winter coats. Earth's population has just lowered from 7 billion to about 200 million. Okay, before we start Chapter 7, let's do another every 3 chapters break to say what on earth is going on. The sun, a second sun appeared. They destroyed each other. No one had noticed. That's completely ridiculous. And it was double the mass because it makes no sense. And anyone with any knowledge of any science whatsoever, it's and they're just so nonchalant about it. He's like, "Oh, Earth, everyone on Earth, almost everyone on Earth just died." Well, the, oh, I need to go back to full webcam for this. This is so absurd. Okay, so everyone on Earth, almost everyone on Earth, just fully died. But the only difference is anyone who had their heat turned on. That is so absurd. Everyone would have died the second the sun disappeared. Obviously, ostensibly, we know this, but it it's just so ridiculous how nonchalant these characters are. Psychopaths. They don't care. They're just like, oh, everyone's dead. Great. Uh, I don't even have words for this. I don't. I see. It's like it was made in a lab to be the worst book possible. You know what? No, no. I can't handle this. It's so funny how just terrible this is. Okay, so I've read through the first about a quarter of the Frozen world, and I'm gonna end the video here. I think that this proves my point. This is a very, very bad book. You don't want me to read through the rest of this. It's so terrible. The Earth is frozen and they're all dead. So I ended it right where what it would normally have happened. Um, yeah, sorry, this is the worst video on the channel, and it's probably going to end up being the longest one on the channel. But Nate, I'll see you on Monday.